Hi, this is Carla Atherton, the director of the Healthy Family Formula and the host of the Children's Health Summit. And I'm here doing kind of like an impromptu, not impromptu, but not a, overly planned interview with Stephanie Seneff, because she and I have been talking about an issue that I think is really important for families to know about the last week. And she's been doing a lot of work to get this information out to people. And because we are facing, the world is actually taken by storm by the current outbreak of COVID-19, and everybody's eyes are on this, wondering what's going on, what's happening, how is it going to affect them, what the causes are, how they can protect themselves. Is it going to affect them financially, in their relationships, in their things that they do, in their work, in their health, of course, right? So everybody's concerned about this, and all eyes are on it. It seems like I actually can't even believe how, nobody no corner of the earth is actually unaffected by it. So Stephanie Seneff, I have to give her a little introduction to her. She is one of my heroes, one of my mentors. I've learned so much from her, and every time I have a discussion with her, I literally go, like, like at the end, I blah, blah, blah. Because she's got so much information, and it's like, I actually likened you, Stephanie, to a human computer to a friend of mine one time. Because I said, you just put all this information in, and she spits out, it synthesizes it and spits out the answer. So I love speaking with her. And she is, I guess I don't know how to explain what she does, but she really basically she has a real passion for explaining what is going on with the human body as far as biochemical processes go, and being able to go down the rabbit hole to causality. And this one rabbit hole of COVID-19 is leading us straight to glyphosate. So I'm going to let her start explaining that whole process by getting started with this question that everybody is asking. And so the first thing that people want to know, one of the first things, is who's at risk, and who is, like, what part of the population is at risk, because we're getting so many conflicting information about that. Like, none of the numbers add up. Nobody really can agree on who's most at risk, but I know you definitely have an opinion about that, Stephanie. So I would really love to get your brilliant brain on this and explain that a little bit to us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. So what I believe is that COVID-19 by itself would not be nearly so toxic if it were not for chronic glyphosate poisoning that we've been experiencing over the last 2 or 3 decades. And it's been getting worse every year. So we've been accumulating more and more glyphosate damage over time, so that we're at a boiling point at this point. And so people who have been exposed to more glyphosate are more susceptible to an acute reaction to COVID-19 that could kill them. And in particular, the lungs. And so it's very clear that COVID-19 is a lung disease. It basically infects the lungs. It doesn't even give you a runny nose. It gives you shortness of breath, maybe it's your first symptom. So it's messing up your lungs. It's going into your lungs and multiplying there and causing them to be unable to manage breathing anymore. And so people are dying from asphyxiation. And so, of course, people who already have lung disease are going to be more susceptible. And those are the people that need to be really, really worried about staying home, not having any human contact. Anybody who's got COPD or emphysema or the fibrosis, lung fibrosis, all these different lung conditions that people are suffering from, they need to be very worried about possibly dying if they catch this disease, and certainly ending up on a respirator and all that kind of stuff. We're saying there's too few respirators. It's clearly destroying the lungs. And when they look at the disease in detail, what's happening, they can see that the virus is multiplying like crazy. The body sets up a cytokine. It's called a cytokine storm. So the immune cells start releasing all these oxidizing agents that are trying to kill the viruses, basically, to keep them in check. And then the antioxidant defenses in the lung are insufficient. So there's basically, I think it's a weakened innate immune system, which prevents you from killing off the viruses to begin with. Normally, the immune system would be able to trap them and clear them if it were working properly. The innate immune system is weak. And then because of that, you get into the cytokine storm. That's sort of an alternative way to kill the viruses, is to shoot them in a sense, rather than to eat them, if you will, because eating them isn't working because the innate immune system is broken. And so this cytokine storm then would normally be okay too, because you would have these antioxidant defenses that the cells have put in place to protect themselves from the oxidation damage, and those are broken too. And so I think the innate immune system and the antioxidant defenses are both messed up by glyphosate. And then that sets you up to fail when you get this virus infection. And so the bottom line is minimize your glyphosate exposure in order to improve the health of your lungs, in order to be able to get this disease and not have a serious consequence. I also believe that we're going to have to get this disease. It's going to have to go through the population. People are going to have to develop antibodies. Eventually, we'll get a herd, a sufficient number of people who have antibodies, that there will be a kind of a herd immunity, the kind of thing they argue with vaccines, that we'll have a natural herd immunity once enough people catch it. Also, I'm hoping the virus will evolve into something less intense. The virus doesn't want to kill its host, so it's in its best interest to change its behavior. So I'm hoping that the combination of those two things will lead to a good outcome, that eventually it'll just be sort of like the flu. It'll be another one of those things that we get. It's a bad cold, basically. And particularly if we can cut back on the glyphosate usage, because we will have many fewer people who are going to be, killed by it and have this enormous problem with their lungs because of it, if we can keep from poisoning ourselves with glyphosate. So my bottom line message is we need to ban glyphosate worldwide, and this virus is a message to us to do that, is how I feel.
Wow, that's significant. So so can you take us through that biochemistry? So how does glyphosate cripple the innate immune system and break the antioxidant system?
Yeah, so that's, of course, a complicated story, and I've been working very hard on it and really doing a lot of reading. I believe that glyphosate has a insidious, unique mechanism of toxicity that involves substituting for glycine during protein synthesis. Glycine is the smallest amino acid. It's one of the coding amino acids. There's about 20 of them that are put together to make proteins, like beads on a string, according to the DNA code. And so the code has a code that indicates glycine, and the system gets confused and grabs glyphosate by mistake and puts it into the protein. I believe this is happening, and I believe the evidence that it's happening is overwhelming, both from the actual studies of the protein that they know it breaks in the plants that kills them, the EPSP synthase. Very specifically, that protein has a highly conserved glycine residue at the place where PEP binds. And if you change that glycine, you change the code so that glycine is alanine. They've shown experimentally that now that enzyme is completely not sensitive to glyphosate at all. In other words, its sensitivity to glyphosate is due to the fact that it has that glycine residue. Glyphosate substitutes, it blocks the ability for PEP to bind because it puts its methylphosphonate at the spot where the phosphate of PEP is supposed to go. So PEP no longer fits into the pocket where it's supposed to go. The enzyme is broken, and it's a supercritical enzyme in the shikimate pathway for both the microbes and the plant. So one of the things that's happening is that glyphosate is disrupting our own gut microbes and preventing them from making the products of the shikimate pathway, which are tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine. Tryptophan is a precursor to something called NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NAD. NAD is an incredibly important molecule in the antioxidant system. It's what makes keeps glutathione in its reduced state. Glyphosate's been shown experimentally to reduce the glutathione levels in the liver, and also to make glutathione oxidized. So there's too much oxidized glutathione compared to reduced glutathione. Reduced glutathione is what you need for the antioxidant system. And you get it by having the NAD, which is also blocked because the tryptophan is blocked. So you have multiple ways in which glyphosate is disrupting your ability to protect yourself from oxidative damage. And so that goes with, once the immune cells go into overdrive and you don't have adequate glutathione, you don't have adequate vitamin C is also, glutathione and vitamin C both depend upon this NAD to maintain their reduced state, which keeps them effective. And the NAD depends on tryptophan, which comes out of the shikimate pathway, which glyphosate blocks. So that's sort of one story. There's a whole other story with regard to collagen that's also critical. And in the lungs, collagen is very much connected to these diseases. too much collagen breakdown in the lungs is causing the lungs to not work properly. There's also surfactants in the lung that are very important for breathing and also for trapping the microbes. There are a couple of proteins in the surfactants in the lung that are called surfactant protein A and surfactant protein D. And these two proteins are very interesting because they have what's called a collagen-like stalk. They have a stalk that's made out of essentially collagen collagen patterns. Collagen is collagen is what's, the glue of the body, right? It's in the joints, in the bones. We have an epidemic in opioid drug overdose that's partly due to chronic pain that's caused by joints and back pain and hips breaking and shoulder problems. We have all these issues with our joints these days. Epidemic in knee surgery. I mean, it's just, the joints are a mess. And that's partly because glyphosate is messing up the collagen. Collagen is by far the most common protein in the body. I think it's like 30% of the protein mass is collagen in our body. And collagen has long, long sequences of GXY, 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 where every third amino acid is a glycine. Those glycines are all, opportunity for glyphosate to substitute. And if glyphosate substitutes, it messes up the triple helix structure of the collagen. And the triple helix structure is very important for the collagen to work properly. And it's also important for these collagen-like stalks of these surfactant proteins to work properly. These are in the lungs. And the A and the D that I mentioned earlier, their collagen stalks are probably being disrupted by glyphosate, which is preventing them from folding properly. So they're not able to go out into the surfactant. They're not able to trap microbes. What they do is they actually trap viruses and bacteria, and so that the macrophages can clear them. So they, when they're not working, the viruses have a field day. Nothing's stopping them from multiplying. And so you get this over exuberant infection that then causes this cytokine storm, which then causes the lung tissue to be destroyed because of the lack of the antioxidant defenses. So I think it's both the collagen and the messing up of the antioxidant, glutathione and vitamin C to be able to do their job. The combination of those two is deadly. So what's really interesting is I found a paper about mice. So you're probably aware of vaping, and there's been all this chatter about this weird lung disease that vaping is causing, right?
Yeah.
And they don't understand why. They don't understand how it's causing that. I believe it's the glyphosate in the vaping fumes that is causing this damage. And so there's this really fascinating paper that I read just a few days ago about these mice, which they exposed the mice to the vaping fumes, the e-cigarette vapors. They exposed these mice to these vapors, and then they very carefully studied what went on in their lungs to see what was going on with these mice. And they found exactly the same thing we're seeing with COVID-19. And they looked at flu. So they actually exposed these mice to flu virus. After they had exposed them to these fumes, they exposed them to flu virus. And they found that they were very poor at being able to clear the flu virus, and that they got a cytokine storm and they got an oxidation damage. Exactly the same sequence that we're seeing with COVID-19 happened to these mice after being exposed to these e-cigarette vapors. And they even identified these two proteins, the surfactant A and surfactant protein D, as being deficient in these mice as a consequence of these e-cigarettes. And they could not explain how they were causing that, but they noticed that that was happening. And that makes sense to me because these are collagen. The collagen's getting wrecked by the glyphosate. If the collagen's wrecked, it can't fold properly. It just gets cleared. You can't produce enough protein. It probably can't even really behave properly in terms of staying in the membrane. It won't be able to. It just won't be able to do its job properly if it can't fold properly. So I think it's, I think that makes a lot of sense. And the other thing is that we see the places where, so another interesting part of this, a piece of this puzzle potentially, is the ethanol in the gasoline. I'm really suspecting. So the thing is, I think breathing glyphosate is what's going to make you susceptible. And we're seeing, first of all, in China, Wuhan is known to have very toxic air. It has a lot of problems with air pollution.
Yes.
Los Angeles obviously does too, and New York City. Those are cities that have a lot of traffic. They have a lot of air pollution. And also in Italy, where they have the breakout what is it, in Lombardy, Italy, northern Italy. They have an especially acute reaction there. That's also a place that's known for air pollution. So we're sort of seeing a common element of air pollution as being associated with increased risk. And particularly in the United States, we've been aggressive with respect to adding ethanol to the gasoline. We have like 10% ethanol in the gasoline today. Most of the gas that's being sold is 10% ethanol. That ethanol is produced, so for the entire world supply, most of the production is either in the United States or Brazil. And both of those countries are producing it from crops that have been exposed to lots of glyphosate. Because in America, it's the GMO Roundup Ready corn. Mm-hmm. And in Brazil, it's sugar beets and sugarcane, which is often sprayed with glyphosate right before the harvest. So I think there's probably glyphosate in the ethanol that's in the gasoline. And glyphosate doesn't break down at the temperature of combustion. So I think the glyphosate is being vaporized into the air and we're breathing it from the car fumes. And there's also these biodiesel fuels that may also be contaminated with glyphosate that are being introduced as a component of diesel fuel. Biodiesel derived from, for example, soybeans in Argentina, which are GMO Roundup Ready soybeans. So you can see that the crops that are precursors to the fuels that are bioengineered are all heavily exposed to glyphosate as far as I can tell.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop you just for a second so we can get everybody like who's boggled, which I think they might be.
Yeah.
I'm going to recap some of this. So, and I hate to stop you because I know how you work. Like as you go down,
I get going again.
And I'm like, I don't want to stop you because then I have no idea what to ask to keep that train going, right? But okay, but I'm going to stop you right there because I think we've got to a really great place. And so, so this is what I was saying to everybody here listening. Like when you get going, you get right back to the reason why. I mean, people can say all the time, like glyphosate's going to cause us. And everybody's like, what? That doesn't mean anything to me. Yeah, we're fine. Well, our bodies will deal with it. Oh, I breathe paint and I breathe this and I breathe that. All these things all the time. It doesn't affect me. Glyphosate's not going to be something else that's going to affect me. We're fine. But if you really look at the biochemistry and what's going on in the body, and how complicated and complex it is. And when we start messing around with that, so if you have something like, a molecule like glyphosate taking the place of a glycine, and so if you understand what glycine is important for, then that is a problem. So the one thing I want to know before I kind of do a little bit of a recap, and then I'll get to the next question, is so what other things do No, and you know what? I'm gonna recap first, and then I'm gonna ask you this question because then I know it's gonna we're gonna get a lot of good answers out of this. Okay, so we've got scenarios. So a couple things going on here. So the first one is that we've got this incapacitated detox system because we've got like glutathione, the production of glutathione as well as vitamin C. They're not the production. They're becoming oxidated, or is it because they're not?
Yes, actually, their ability to be brought back to the state where they work depends on NADPH, and NADPH depends on the shikimate pathway, which glyphosate disrupts.
Yes. Okay, and that's because of the glycine issue.
That's the glycine. Glyphosate acting as a glycine analog in EPSP synthase, which is the enzyme that it famously disrupts that kills the plants. That's well known. That's well established. And it's well established that glycine residue is critical for glyphosate to work. If you replace it with alanine, it doesn't work anymore. It kills glyphosate's ability to kill that enzyme.
Yeah.
Because it's no longer glycine. That's a strong indicator that it's substituting for that glycine residue is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Chemically speaking, that is a very strong evidence for a case that this is what glyphosate's doing. So most people say, no, it's not possible. Glyphosate can't be doing that. It's not biochemically possible. I don't agree with that. I don't see why it can't do it because it is a perfect glycine molecule. It's exact match for glycine, except for having some extra stuff on its nitrogen atom, and that's what messes everything up. Mm-hmm. But the nitrogen atom is not going to be allowed to be in the pocket because the nitrogen atom has to be out and able to hook up with the rest of the paper dolls because it's building this big paper doll chain. So the pocket has to leave the nitrogen out, which is why it still fits. And the pocket is such that it fits only glycine, no other amino acid. Glycine is the only amino acid that has no side chains. Mm-hmm. But glyphosate also has no side chains. So it fits perfectly for glycine, but it won't fit for anything else. So if you change the glycine to alanine, which has an extra methyl group on it as a side chain, now glyphosate won't work anymore, just as glycine won't fit because the code is wrong, the shape is wrong, and the glyphosate won't fit. just as glycine won't fit if the code says alanine. It's the
Okay.
code that matters. So when it codes for glycine, glyphosate can substitute. If it doesn't code for glycine, glyphosate can't substitute. It's very black and white, which is why it has a tremendous effect on the EPSP synthase. You can change that molecule to get rid of that code for glycine, and then that molecule is safe. That's the basis of the GMO Roundup Ready crops.
Mm-hmm.
It's not glycine, it's alanine at that spot. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, they have a bacterial version of this enzyme that works fine in the presence of glyphosate.
Mm-hmm.
That's crucial because that's really the strongest evidence for the concept that it substitutes for glycine during protein synthesis. Once you accept that, and now you think of the consequences of it, you can find the proteins that are critically dependent on glycine. And you find actually that many of the proteins that are involved in the antioxidant stuff depend on glycine as well. And they bind phosphate just the same as EPSP synthase. Depending on glycine at a place that binds phosphate is a very strong indicator of susceptibility to glyphosate substitution. So there are a whole bunch of proteins I'm working on huge amounts of material to describe all of these. It's quite fascinating. It's how you can explain the correlation with all of these diseases that we're seeing rising dramatically in our population.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted.
Obesity, autism.
Yes, that's what I wanted to talk to you about actually, because we're all, this is the upstream stuff, but we're experiencing the downstream effects. So let's talk about that. So if you have this problem, like the glycine, disruption of glycine, or maybe, not even, I guess it would be, symptoms you would get if you had a glycine deficiency, I suppose, substitution. So we're talking about, reduced ability to detoxify, right? Because we don't have the glutathione that we need. And glutathione is really, I've even heard it explained in the way that, your the levels of glutathione in your body actually dictate your health and your longevity, like how long you're going to live. If it's depleted,
yeah,
you're dying earlier. And so, and there's also this whole collagen issue, as well as the microbes in the gut being actually, I don't know if they're directly killed by the glyphosate. So if you could speak to that too, in just a second. But let's talk about maybe some of those downstream effects. So we're seeing things that are related to glyphosate, disruption in the body, like you were just saying, autism. And so what else are we going to see if we have this problem with glycine?
Well, we're seeing it already. We're seeing an exponential growth in a large number of diseases, and autism is certainly one of them. It matches perfectly with the rise in glyphosate usage on core crops. It's an exact match. The p-value of 0.0000, multiple zeros before the first significant digit of the likelihood that correlation could have occurred by chance. It's the extremely strong correlation between the rise in glyphosate and the rise in autism. Same thing for dementia and Alzheimer's. And various gut inflammation, infection, gut infection even. So pathogen overgrowth in the gut, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, these things are all matching they're all rising and they're all matching. And of course we have all these issues with collagen dysfunction with all the joints and bones. And then there's several cancers that are matching very well also: pancreatic cancer, thyroid cancer, lung and liver and kidney disease, very strong correlation. Rise in fatty liver disease, that one has been shown dramatically in studies on rats. I think it was rats, it might have been mice, I always mix those two up, that were exposed to doses of glyphosate that were below regulatory limits. So supposedly perfectly safe doses of glyphosate were given to these rats, and they developed fatty liver disease as a consequence. And that one's interesting too, because I think that I've identified a particular protein that I'm suspecting is causing that, is a central player in the fatty liver disease, a protein called PEPCK, phosphoenolpyruvate carboxykinase. That protein is very interesting to me because it has an exact pattern that matches with the pattern for EPSP synthase, which is the one it's known to disrupt in the shikimate pathway in the plants. That's how it kills the weeds. But PEPCK also binds PEP, the same thing. EPSP synthase binds PEP. It's the same molecule. It's a phosphate. So whenever you've got a situation where a protein has a highly conserved glycine residue that binds at a place where it binds phosphate. And there are many, many other proteins that bind phosphate, because that's a very important thing that proteins do. And I think pretty much all of those phosphate binding sites are sensitive to glyphosate substitution for the glycine, which glyphosate comfortably fits its methylphosphonate unit, which is sticking off of its nitrogen. It fits it into the spot where phosphate is supposed to go. And now the substrate no longer fits. And that's going to mess up that protein. And that is just really, really crucial to cause a lot of problems with metabolism and everything else. It's really quite a nightmare once you think about the consequence of messing up those proteins that are binding phosphate. But PPCK is very interesting. I've read a lot about it. In the liver, it's responsible for gluconeogenesis, which is to convert things like fatty acids into glucose. You can actually, you can produce sugar from fats in the liver with this enzyme. Without this enzyme, you can't. The gluconeogenesis doesn't work. So if that enzyme is broken, the fats can't be converted to sugar, and therefore they pile up. It's that simple. And it's been shown that if that enzyme is defective, you get fatty liver disease.
And and I think even too, there's a couple other things that, even autoimmunity, because we know that one of the triad of, autoimmunity is, the catalyst, one of the catalysts is actually, gut issues, right? With, dysbiosis.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
like nutritional deficiencies, because those gut microbes actually digest our food for us, and mental health problems, because, you're talking about messing up that tryptophan. And so we need that to produce the right neurochemicals. So it's like the consequences are everything in every single condition, I would think. And it seems like, we can say that there's one smoking gun, and there isn't. There's actually a combination. I always talk about that, where there's so many things going on at the same time. So, we're not just looking at a toxicity of glyphosate, but I think it's it's like one of the major ones that's going to actually be, weaken everything else for all the other ones to be take opportunity.
Absolutely. And in fact, glyphosate has been shown to disrupt the cytochrome P450 enzymes in the liver. And those enzymes are very, very important for detoxifying many other toxic chemicals. So once it's synergistic toxicity, once your glyphosate is messing up your liver's ability to detox these other things, then they become more toxic. So they're collaborating to take us down. Glyphosate is collaborating with pretty much everything else. It also messes up the metals. It does a tremendous mess up on all of our minerals. It binds very tightly. It's a metal chelator, and it binds, zinc and cobalt and manganese, making those minerals unavailable to the gut microbes to start with. I think that's how it messes up lactobacillus, or an important component. It definitely kills off lactobacillus, which are really important in the gut. With the baby, those are the microbes that should be getting a foundational hold on the gut, and they aren't able to do that because they're being poisoned by glyphosate. And then you get an overgrowth of these other microbes, these pathogens like Clostridia, that are releasing these toxic molecules that you can't detox because glyphosate's killing your liver. I mean, it's really just an incredible cascade. It's so frightening. And different people have different kinds of responses because they have different genetics, and they have different microbial distributions in their gut. Those things all matter to sort of change the behavior of the illness, but everybody's going to get sick. I mean, it's just horrible. I think we're killing off kind of all life on Earth. I mean, not just humans, but everything else as well. This chemical is really a monster.
I completely agree. So let's talk about the sources. Where are we getting glyphosate from? You were talking about, as biodiesel fuels. So because of the ethanol. And so that's
and biodiesel actually isn't ethanol. The ethanol is in the regular fuels.
In the regular.
But ethanol is 10% ethanol in the regular fuels, the gasoline. But then there's also a biodiesel that they've been developing, and I don't know to what extent that's been introduced, but that looks like it could potentially be a problem as well. I'm a little curious about these the problems on the oh shoot, why am I losing the cruise ships? Because cruise ships, I've always had trouble with cruise ships because of the fumes from the diesel fuel that they burn. So I'm wondering, I don't know whether they've got any, I couldn't figure that out. I was trying to find, there are biofuels being developed, biodiesel fuels, and people are working towards the goal of being able to replace some of the diesel fuel in the cruise ships with biodiesel. I don't know to what extent that's actually happened, but if it has happened, it could also explain why the cruise ships are getting particularly hit hard, because people could be getting exposed to. It's a theory that has it's totally speculation at this point, because
Yeah.
I just don't know, but it's possible. And I think biodiesel, for example, in Italy is also something I've been wondering about. And Italy has had to import some of its biodiesel. Europe is ahead of us in terms of biodiesel, as far as I can understand. We're a world leader on ethanol. The U.S. we're using more ethanol in our gasoline, I think, than just about anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So that all of this is supposed to help global climate change. Try to
Yeah.
reduce the carbon dioxide burden. So it's a worthy cause. But if you're going to pour glyphosate into the engine of the car, it's not going to work. I mean, it's not going to be a good thing to get people to be breathing glyphosate. And I'm just wondering to what extent fuels everywhere, and certainly in the United States and possibly in Europe with the biodiesel. As far as I can tell, biodiesel sourced from Argentina, which is derived from soybeans, which are GMO Roundup Ready soybeans, plenty of glyphosate there,
Yeah.
or biodiesel in Italy being developed from olive oil. You have to use these vegetable oils for the biodiesel, which is different from the ethanol, of course, is an alcohol. So they're very different, the alcohol and the oil. But the biodiesel is these oils that are derived from vegetable oils. So the soybean oil, which is going to be plenty of glyphosate. And in Italy, they use olive oil. They actually can convert olive oil into biodiesel. Italy does not, they're very good about not having GMOs, but they do use glyphosate, as far as I can tell, to control the weeds growing around the olive trees. So they've probably got glyphosate in the olive oil as well.
Okay.
We just don't know. No one's measuring. Yes, people should look. I mean, the researchers should be finding out if there's glyphosate in these oils, in these fuels.
Yeah.
We really need to find that out.
I think so too, and it'd be easy enough to find that out if just someone takes up that cause. So we've got this, and parents listening might be just a little overwhelmed, thinking, okay, well, how am I supposed to control that? If it's in the biodiesel as well as just our regular gasoline. But I think that there are a couple other sources that we can control, and one of those obviously is not to vape. That's something that I'm just like horrified with, thinking that vaping's better an alternative to smoking. No,
vaping is terrible, and if you vape, you'd better hide out at home and try to avoid this virus for sure. If you've been vaping, you've got to hide. You've got to hide in your home and not see anybody.
Yeah,
because I think that's going to be a direct hit on the people. And in fact, it was shown in China. They did studies, and they found that people who were diagnosed with COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, had an 18-fold increased risk of getting into the ICU if they caught this virus compared to those who didn't have that. And people who smoked, I think they had like a 4-fold increased risk of getting into the ICU. There's some data coming out of China recently, and I've been looking at it. Clearly, people who have previous lung problems are in trouble with this virus. That's just very clear. And so you're looking at cigarette smoking, vaping, all of that is going to be problematic.
Yeah. And then
tobacco is a Roundup Ready crop. I should have said tobacco is a Roundup Ready crop. So I've always thought that chemicals in the cigarettes are the reason why they're toxic. That if you could actually smoke an organic cigarette, it might be fine. It might not be a health problem to smoke an organic cigarette. But we never get organic cigarettes anymore. They do terrible things to the tobacco crops. They there's a lot of chemicals that are used. And glyphosate is definitely one of them. It's almost all the tobacco, as far as I can tell, is GMO Roundup Ready.
Well, let's go. Yeah. And let's go to something super, super, super common that is a source of glyphosate, which is food.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is your good news, right? Because you can buy organic, you can buy certified organic, and you can greatly reduce your glyphosate burden. And I would encourage everybody listening to do that. I've certainly, my husband and I have been buying only certified organic food for a long time, for many years now. And once we started going organic, we both saw significant health improvements. He's been able to shed a lot of his drugs that he was taking for high blood pressure and diabetes. He doesn't take diabetes drugs anymore because of eating an organic diet for these past few years. It's quite remarkable how much you can improve your health simply by buying certified organic food. You will get that money back. The extra money you spend for certified organic, you're going to get it back in spades, along with having being a lot healthier, which is so much more pleasant, living healthy rather than living sick. It's totally worth it to buy certified organic food.
Completely. And people do say that. They say it's expensive. Some people don't believe in it. I mean, what you've just explained right now is just like, well, go ahead and argue with that, because you can't. And it's worth what we do in our family is we hunter-gather. So we kind of, you know, go to different stores. Like, so we have to do that because, you know, we can't find everything in one place all the time, but more and more grocery stores are carrying organic. Even in this crisis that we're having right now, you can still find organics. But people, you know,
Yes.
might be pinching pennies a little more and all that stuff. But really, like, if we're looking at things for prevention, and if this is the reason why we're all holed up in our homes in the first place, I'm thinking that part of that budget, even though it's not as big as it might have been, or you're kind of worried about the future, it's still worth that, because we're trying to stick around here and now and make sure our bodies are as healthy as possible, and not, and these biochemical processes aren't happening, that nothing is broken anymore, right? So and I know that glyphosate is really difficult to get out of the body. I know that, so we can stop, you know, putting it in, but then how do we get it out? Do you have any sort of strategies for that? I know when we met in person at a conference in September, we were exposed to a couple of different things that we could do about that, and we had a conversation about this. But is there anything, you know, that you kind of like formulated in your mind since then, as far as what we do about the current burden of glyphosate in our bodies right now?
Yeah, I mean, there are some things that are being recommended to try to take it out, and that people are enthusiastic about. And one thing is fulvic acid and humic acid, which is organic matter from the soil. Apparently that's able to, the claim is it's able to bind to the glyphosate and take it out through the feces. I haven't confirmed it, but that seems promising. There's also acetobacter. So I like to argue Bragg's organic apple cider vinegar, which we pretty much have a salad every night, make our own salad dressing using Bragg's organic apple cider vinegar. It's first of all, it's a healthy fermented food, so it's good for you in general, but acetobacter are among the very few microbes that I have found that are able to, some species of acetobacter are able to break glyphosate down enzymatically. I have not confirmed, and again, this is something research should be done to see if the acetobacter that are in the apple cider vinegar are able to break it down, because that would be really, really great to be able, breaking it down is the best that you can do, get rid of it. And that CP bond that it has is difficult to break. The phosphonate combined to the carbon, attached to the carbon, is very difficult to break. Many bacteria don't have the capacity. We don't have the capacity to break it down, our own cells. So we have to depend on microbes to do that. And I think that actually it may be that there are some people who appear to be very hardy and insensitive to glyphosate, that may be that because they have harbored bacteria in their gut that are able to efficiently break it down. I think that's quite possible. That some people have gotten lucky that they've been able to nourish these particular microbes in their gut that are able to break down glyphosate, so that they don't, you know, it just gets cleared by those microbes. That may be happening. That may be why some people are less sensitive than others.
Yeah, it's two of those things. I know that some people are using foot baths, you know, so I haven't really like, I've used, you know, I have lots of clients that use them and stuff like that, but I'm still sort of like trying, you know, figure all that stuff out, measuring, doing testing before and after and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of really great evidence for that. And I also want to mention too, is if we're relying, so if we're going the natural route, right? Like if we're saying, okay, our food, let's just eat food that's organic, you know, not spray it. You know, be cognizant of even where we live, but that's not going to be changing right now at this very moment. You know, not be spray crops and all that. But I mean, but for now, like what we take in, that's huge, and that's a lot of power right there. But also stop killing the microbes that are in the gut, because you know we're really using things like medications and antibiotics. I'm not saying that sometimes people feel like they need that at a certain time, but you know when I'm seeing the treatment that's happening, and I don't know, I'm gonna make it a little controversial here. Some of the treatment that's happening for people who are contracting a virus, maybe that it's COVID, maybe it isn't, you know, or a bacteria. You know, there's like a lot of knee-jerk, like not knee-jerk, but the response is to, you know, to use an antibiotic or or some kind of medication that's to knock down viral infection. For one thing, antibiotics don't work for viral infections, and for another thing, but there's like this combination treatment that's being used too like a medication as well as antibiotics to treat actual like COVID-19. And so I'm concerned about that, because if we are actually impairing our immune system, own immune system, that is our immune system in the gut there, and as well as, you know, we are impairing that ability for us to carry out that glyphosate that might be one of those like way upstream smoking guns in the first place. So do you have anything to say about that, Stephanie?
Are you referring to hydroxyquinone? hydroxyquinone, which is used to treat malaria.
Yeah, well,
Because
that's
that's been,
actually,
Trump mentioned that. President Trump mentioned hydroxyquinone.
yeah.
Is that hydroxyquine? Is it?
You're saying
Is
it
that
better
right?
than me. I'm not even going to try. Yes, that's one of the things.
I try.
But also, I mean,
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got that.
not even necessarily that. I just mean, like just people that are like every day, not even like don't have the virus, but they're just like got an ear infection at and they're like, those people are going to be taking these antibiotics for all kinds of different things right now. They got a foot infection, or they've got, something, whatever.
Right.
And that is actually making them more susceptible, I'm thinking, to the effects.
Yeah, I would think so. Well, because of course you're going to be messing up your probiotics. Whenever you take antibiotics, you're really messing up your gut microbes, and you can't afford to mess up your gut microbes because they're providing all kinds of critical nutrients for us that we can't make. All the B vitamins, many of them come out of that shikimate pathway. And in fact, that's NAD is basically niacin, which is a B vitamin.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I mentioned, it comes from tryptophan, is going to be disrupted by glyphosate, but also cobalamin and folate, those are all going to be disrupted by glyphosate. So the B vitamins, I think, are getting hit hard, and that's part of the problem with people being susceptible to this virus. It's just really a matter of keeping your immune system strong so that it can fight off the virus without having to ship out all these cytokines that are going to destroy your own tissues. It's really, if you can simply clear the viruses without having to release a bunch of oxidative elements, you're going to be much, much better off. And the way you do that is by keeping your innate immune system strong. One thing to do is to get outside in the sunlight. I definitely believe in vitamin D to protect your innate immune system. So get out in the sunlight and soak up those rays.
Yeah, I love that advice, and it feels good. And I want to say too, like that's where I'm always trying to lead people, is to thinking about the immune system. And when I'm talking about the medication and the antibiotics and such, I'm not trying to have like a be anti anything. I really just want to go upstream, because I feel like once we get that part sorted out, like you've been doing, like really helping us to do all these, all this time right now, I think that's where we find all the answers, where everything just kind of makes sense. It makes sense to actually clean up the diet, eat things that are like, eat organic foods, put that effort and that focus on that, really weigh the potential consequences of medications and antibiotics before you use them. And then if you need if you're in that situation, how do we rebuild? So there are all kinds of things that we can do that, right? Like with apple cider vinegar, fulvic acid, humic acid, and
sauerkraut.
Yep, sauerkraut, other fermented foods. If you are not histamine intolerant, that's another hour that we can talk about that. But, right, but just, if you understand that, and also, using maybe targeted, like really good probiotics, like a spore biotic, maybe, something like that.
Those are there's people that have gotten good results from those.
Yeah, I have a lot of
probiotics.
For sure. Lots of clients that do. And especially if they maybe do have that issue with histamine and they can't actually eat the fermented foods. And so, so I think that there's a lot that people can do about this whole issue of glyphosate, as long as they're aware of it. So I don't want people coming away from this like panicked and going, I'm breathing it and I'm driving cars and what am I going to do? Because I think that does need to be dealt with on a broader level, like on a,
and if everybody buys organic, they won't grow food with glyphosate, and the glyphosate will disappear from the cars too, because if we can just get rid of the glyphosate from the source, that's the answer. I think until we do that, we're all just going to get sicker and sicker. I mean, I think it's going to be a really rough period. The next 50 years is going to be a really dark time in human history, I believe. Hopefully we'll come out of it shining bright, because we will have realized what we've done. We would have corrected our ways. We will think in terms of growing food sustainably, renewable, improve the soil every time you grow the crop. We have to think in terms of renewing the soil for the future, not destroying it for the future, which is what we're doing now. We're making, the soil is so sick that the crop yields are going down. Everything is kind of collapsing with this chemical. And I just hope the farmers finally recognize that they have to do things differently. And, we're going to have a lot of people out of work. We can put them to work pulling weeds, right? We don't need to
Yeah,
have glyphosate on the
right.
crops. We can have people pull weeds,
Yeah, there
It's
are
not
other
that hard,
jobs,
right?
right? Like with the new industry, that's
Not a bad job, I think.
easier.
I may be naive, but, it doesn't seem like I used to always pull weeds in my yard, just to, I never used any chemicals on my yard.
Yeah,
I
no,
enjoyed pulling the dandelions by hand. It's good exercise.
it
You
is.
know?
And then you can eat them because they are
Yeah, right.
organic and they're actually beneficial, right? They're good for your
Yeah, they're
liver.
very healthy food, but of course it's very dangerous to eat dandelions these days because they're probably loaded with
No, I'm not
glyphosate.
eating those. I'm not eating those. Well, I just have to say thanks so much. Is there anything final thoughts that you want to say before I let you go for today?
Geez, I don't know. I just hope everybody can stay safe. I think that the really important thing is that the people who have the risk factors need to be aware they have the risk factors and they need to
Mhm.
stay inside and stay away from people. Try very hard not to catch it. Let the rest of the population actually catch it and get over it and build the herd immunity. I think that's the way we're going to have to go. We obviously can't put this thing back into the genie back into the box,
Mhm.
genie back into the, what did you put it back
The
into?
bottle. It's the bottle.
The bottle. The bottle. You can't put the genie back into the bottle at this point. The virus is out there. It's gonna be around for a long time, I think, and it may mutate into something more benign,
Yeah.
which is what I'm hoping. This virus does mutate a lot, so I just don't think it's going to continue to be so vicious. I hope it's
Mhm.
going to find a way to tame itself as more and more people get it. And maybe that's what's going on with China, actually, because, China's had a leveling off. South Korea has had a leveling off. That sort of gives hope to the rest of us that we're going to have that too, that the
Mhm.
number of people dying is going down.
Mhm.
Um, they're kind of they're relating to the virus in some way that's working at this point. So we need to be there. We need to get over this hump, and it's going to be a rough ride, but hopefully there will be sunshine on the other side. So
Yeah, I think so too. I hope so too. I know so, actually. So thanks so much for lending us your brilliant brain today, Stephanie. I really, really appreciate you being here. And I know that people listening are going to get a lot out of this and be part of that change that you're advocating for. So thanks so much for the work that you do in the world.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.